should the world be bracing for? More conflict? Because I mean, you've got, we've got old grievances. I mean, there are so many old grievances between Pakistan and India, between India and China, and India and Bangladesh. Now India and the Maldives. So in our own neighborhood, we have so much, going for us. Apart from the Middle East, of course, which India needs to trade with and continue to stay connected with. So where do you see any flashpoints? Can you name three flashpoints?
Well, there are already some studies that have developed a very detailed simulations about what we might see in the next 5 to 10 years. Even the US has published one of them. They are saying that by 2027 there'll be a clash, a kinetic clash with China. There is even a
Mm-hmm.
very detailed scenario that speaks about 10,000 American casualties and 100,000 Chinese casualties. They went through a very detailed scenario of that conflict. Okay, there are some that
And
are
would this
taking.
be on Chinese land, or the Chinese waters, or the Indo-China Sea? Where
It
would
will
it be?
be on the South China Sea,
Hmm.
around Taiwan,
Hmm.
Guam. Guam will be
Mm-hmm.
erased, by the way, according to that
Uh,
simulation, which are that only in Guam about 5,000 casualties, American casualties. Okay, and part of Japan. So the we are heading towards a very difficult decade, and we are trying to understand how come it's converging now in the next decade, which is the most
yeah.
important thing. Since we are at the very initial stage of that historical process, we still don't have, first of all, a lot of information of what's happening behind the scene. And of course, we are having a hard time understanding the nature of that conflict, but we are trying. And there is one theory at the moment that I'm also developing, and I'm working on a new book about it. We are trying to understand how come we have entered in the 20s of the 21st century such a
Uh-huh.
period of time that everything is, the feeling is that the globalization is collapsing. How come because
Hmm.
everybody was taking advantage of globalization. How come globalization is in trouble? So there is
Yeah.
one theory that I'm developing with also others that says the following: for millennia, humanity was in conflicts with each other. Okay, and the basic idea was that each one of us is afraid that his or her offsprings will not be able to survive because of lack of resources and nutrition and energy, etc., etc. What When you analyze history from a very global perspective, you see that there was an amazing pendulum. A group of people that were lacking some resources, let's say, would see if there are other groups that have those resources. And if though that other group doesn't want to share those resources, they will invade that group, kill, slaughter, and invade and take those resources. Okay, after a while, the that group that lost in that conflict, you know, got
And rehabilitate
recovers.
itself.
Okay,
Yeah.
recovers, and then does the same thing to the other group. The last
Uh-huh.
time we have seen it was World War One and World War Two. That's what
Hmm.
humanity has been doing between those
That's
two.
right.
Okay, so after World War Two, there were some thinkers that are geopoliticians that said, let's try to stop this vicious cycle in history. How do you do it?
Hmm.
So the idea was that instead of slaughtering and enslaving the other groups that lost. Let's help them instead of being victorious. Let's help the losers. And that's how came the idea of the Marshall Project all over, with Germany and with Japan,
That's
etc.
right. Yes, yes,
So, but
yes.
that's not enough. In order for
Mm,
everyone to feel that there's no need for conflict because they can receive all their needs, you have
mm.
to you have to open the seas so that everybody can move all things they need from one place to another place without being afraid that somebody will steal it in the meantime, on their way to your nation. But that's not enough. You need an international platform that if there is some misunderstanding or something like that, instead of going to the battlefield, you better go to the UN and solve your problems instead of killing each other. And still,
That's right.
it's not enough, because you need, trade organizations. You need to give each nation the feeling that if they need something, it's very easy
They can
to
knock
get
on
it.
somebody's door. Yes,
Somebody will have it. You sign a treaty without any customs, without anything, and goods are moving all over the world. This is what we call globalization. Okay, we
mm,
did something unusual in humanity in a matter of 50, 60 years. Most of us went from poverty to amazing lifestyle.
that's true. That's true.
Okay,
But tell me, so the one flashpoint you said would be, China, US, and Guam getting obliterated.
but
Uh, you know,
how come the system is dissolving? This is the issue.
yes, yes.
Okay, the issue is that this system that benefited everybody is in trouble, and the reason is, for that platform, for that global platform to work well, it needed some policing. So the U.S. took the role of policing the system, and that cost trillions of dollars. When
Mm,
the USSR has collapsed, the US said, well, it's too much. Everybody is benefiting from that system, and we are paying for it. So
yeah, yeah.
they came to NATO and said, you need also to pay for the expenses of security. They came to Japan, they came to everybody. But
And then,
nobody wanted to pay their share, because they said, well,
mm,
there are no wars anymore.
yeah,
And then the US
yeah.
started retreating from the world.
That's right. That's
When
right.
retreating from the world, there's no void. Others started getting in. And suddenly the US realized that it's not that people are trying to compete with them, they are trying to take over the world
Mm,
platform, the world order. And that's what's happening now. That world order has collapsed because, take for example, when Putin invaded the Ukraine,
mm.
actually a few years before that, he signed a treaty that he will not invade.
He did. Yes.
So now nations cannot even count on treaties that are signed. No peace accords.
Mm,
You cannot rely on food security, because when Putin did a blockade around Ukraine, there were nations that did not receive grains that already they have paid for. So
that's right.
people
That's
started
right.
being afraid for energy
Food
security and
security.
food security, etc. And now we are at a stage in which we are reorganizing ourselves in blocks. And
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is what we're seeing now. And those blocks are starting to compete. And those blocks, when they see the other block is organizing itself, they will do anything they can to stop that kind of
That's
accords.
true. That's why you
That,
have a China-Russia alignment, which is, a China-Russia-Iran alignment against the US and its allies,
exactly. And
which includes India and
that's why
Japan.
Iran is using their proxies to try and break that process of doing the
True.
Abraham Accords. This is what
Yes.
we're going through now. And basically, if you go and see the parallel of this epoch in history, it's exactly the early 30s in Europe,
Mm.
which
That's
is
what I was going to say.
frightening.
That you're back to your 80-year cycle theory.
Exactly. This is frightening. Now, in the 30s, nations didn't have nuclear power. And now
Yes.
many nations are having nuclear power, which might be devastating for humanity. And this is
But
why we need to raise.
isn't it also true that because of nuclear powers, the fact that countries have nuclear power, it's also been a sort of a deterrent. I mean, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think there were lessons learned, and nobody has actually used nuclear weapons, really,
Okay,
so to speak. It's more a threat
well,
than anything else.
this is, I believe, the worst conception of our time.
Hmm.
Because if you go and study the past, you'll see that there was no tool that humanity
Hmm.
has developed that they did not use at the end, even in conflicts,
Ah. Oh.
which is frightening. Okay.
Yes.
And this is a concept. You see a concept that is taking hold for, let's say, a century or 50 years or 60 years. And then when it will collapse, everybody will say, there were so many signs. Take a look what's happening now with Putin. They are out loud speaking that he will use nuclear power.
Yes. Yes.
This now the signs are already over there. And we need to raise attention to anybody that can listen and want to listen that this is a very frightening and mistaken concept that we need to take or put aside from the table of the decision making. We cannot allow new nations to have, and specifically rogue nations, to have nuclear power because deterrence doesn't work and it will not work. And it's frightening if something, and God forbid, will happen with the nuclear power, because these are not ballistic
Missiles. Yes.
missiles. This is much worse than that. Now, people
Yeah.
didn't even think, by the way, that a nation will send 300 ballistic missiles to another nation. That
True.
was imaginable. 300. Yeah, I was thinking, like
Out
North
of which
Korea, they're sending one
299.
here and one there, not
Yeah.
300. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
threshold is constantly being crossed. And we need to be very, very careful and need to speak out loud that it's a very dangerous conception. And we need
So
to
do you
do as
see
much
do you
as we
see
can.
Russia do you see Russia Ukraine as the second, you know, sort of implosion point? I mean, there's China, there's Russia, and who else? North Korea?
Of course, North Korea. Now, the blocks are bit by bit reorganizing themselves. The blocks are clear. We are speaking
Hmm.
about the nations we have spoken about. There are nations in Africa that are already part of that block. There are
Really?
most of the nations in South America are already in that block. Okay, out of 14 nations, 12 nations are already in the Chinese block. So even around the US, there is, things are happening, and most of us are not aware that things are brewing behind the scene. And
Yes, absolutely.
so this is just one way to understand what's happening. It doesn't say that we really understand, but the more we understand better, the more we can prepare ourselves to unfortunate things.